So there's a question I keep coming back to on this show, which, initially used to be something along the lines of like, why are we lonely? But that has very much shifted because I get the impression there isn't one single answer to it, but I think we all have a general read on what's making us lonely. And it's shifted more now into this exploration of how do we continue to let people in, even after we learn or see how badly things can go.
Where are you going with this?
Today's guest writes about those kinds of questions. She puts people in rooms together, whether through marriages, family, or just random happenstance. And then she watches what happens when the performance falls away and everyone stops pretending to be okay. Her newest book, Strangers in the Villa, is about a couple who is retreating to Spain to repair their marriage after an affair. And the two strangers they invite in who have no intention of leaving, we'll say. It is a sun-soaked slow burn and deeply unsettling, which is honestly one of my favorite combinations. Please welcome to the show, Robyn Harding. Thank you.
And I love how you tied the plot and theme of this book into your podcast.
Thank you. I was reading the book over the last week, and it was funny because at first, I wouldn't say I was struggling to connect it at all. It's just that I was sort of, because of the way you structured the book, I was sort of trying to figure out what was going to happen, right? I was much more just invested in the story itself rather than trying to, connect. But then by the end of it, I was like, oh, okay, I've got questions. I want to, sometimes when we bring authors on, I get more into sort of the weeds of craft or concept or things like that. But I have questions about the book that I'd like to explore first, if you're up for that.
Happy to.
So your main characters, Sydney and Curtis, they're trying to rebuild their connection in isolation, despite the fact that they're trying to connect, they're doing it alone in a lot of ways. And because of that, one of their first instincts is to then invite in complete strangers.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm curious, what is it that initially kind of drew you into that tension between, sort of escaping from the world, but then immediately letting the strangest part of the world in?
Right, right. And it's interesting because I'm seeing, a lot of reviews online and stuff, and people are like, I would never let anyone into my home ever. Like every comment says that.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I grew up in a small town, and maybe I'm a little bit too, maybe I'm naive. I don't know. Have I invited a stranger in? Probably not. But would I in that context?
Sure.
And I don't know. The idea for this book came from a trip I took to Spain with my husband and a bunch of friends we met from Australia. And we met this couple who had moved from Sydney, Australia, and bought a house on a very remote hillside above the Costa Brava in Spain. And they were living all alone in, idyllic surroundings, and everything was going great. And everyone thought, oh, how wonderful. They're living their dream. Like, this is something they want to do and they're doing it. And it was going great for them. But all I could think of was, oh my God, that's so isolated and so remote. And you don't speak the language, and you don't have your community. You don't have support. And I thought, what if you added complications in this marriage, and then somebody shows up, and it just felt like the perfect setting for a thriller.
Yeah, big time.
And the strangers is the strangers can be, the person you're married to could be a stranger to you. So there's kind of layers of strangers in this novel.
Something I always think about. I always have to kind of laugh about when internet commenters are like, well, why did they do this? And why did they do that? And what I don't think those questions factor in is the idea, I heard quite recently, characters don't know what genre they're in, right? So it's like, and because think about it in real life, you hear a noise, you don't think, oh, I must be in a horror movie.
I do.
Right? Well, I mean, right? Same, but I would say maybe rational people. I don't know. Right?
True. People who aren't thriller writers, they think, oh, it's a branch fell, and I'm like, is it Max Murderer?
Right? Exactly. Here comes Mothman. Right? That's,
Well, yeah, it's true, and I like to I always do character profiles before I start writing. And then I know these people pretty well, and I know why they will make the choices that they make.
Mhm.
And there are things in their background that, whether they make it into the book or not, that inform the way they act.
Mhm.
And also, you need people to make mistakes in a
Yeah.
thriller, or
Yes.
there would be no plot. If everyone just did the right thing, it
Yeah.
would be a very short plot.
I mean, I feel like that's the case for everything, though.
Yeah,
Right? Like,
true.
why would you want fiction of any kind where things work out?
Exactly.
Right? You know,
Exactly.
that's yeah.
Every plot is a problem overcome, right?
Mhm,
So,
mhm.
yeah.
There's often in a lot of your books, it's this idea of I almost see it as like the hurt people type thing, or like
Yes.
the damaged are doing more damage type
Yes.
explorations. There was a quote. I think in the blurb it says, it's the damaged doing damage.
It's Liz Nugent, who's one of my favorite
Mhm.
thriller authors and a lovely friend of mine. And she said, damaged and damaging characters wreaking
Mhm.
havoc on each other. It's such a
Mhm.
great
It was
blurb.
beautiful.
She was my first reader. So nice.
Amazing. And what a gift for that
Yes,
quote,
yes.
but when you're approaching your characters, you said you make these profiles and things like that.
Mhm.
Do you approach them sort of, how do I put it? Do you look at them as broken people or sort of just human? Or, what is the sort of the line of internal differentiation for you around that?
I don't know if I do differentiate. And I do always have some compassion for my villains also.
Totally.
Like I do think there are reasons people do behave in certain ways. And especially in this one, Strangers in the Villa, there's some really morally gray issues that come up with some of the bad things. Like I've heard a lot that you shift allegiances a lot in this story because
That was me reading. Yeah.
well, yeah, because you're like, oh, what a horrible person. Oh,
Yeah.
wait a minute. Now I understand more.
Yeah.
Maybe they're not the horrible person. Maybe someone else is. So, yeah, I think that I don't think I define exactly whether they're. I think it's all a part of being human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like I could get that sense through the writing of like you said, people tend to make choices based on the choices that they have made in the past.
Yeah.
It informs what they're going to do based on what they have done. It's kind of the
Yes.
only way you can, in a
Yeah.
certain way, right? But there didn't seem to be any mustache twirling,
Yeah.
just pure black and white villainy throughout.
There's some very strong reasons why people are behaving badly in this novel for sure.
So at one point, or at multiple points, the way Curtis sort of explains his affair is he uses the word meaningless quite
Yes.
often, which I read as almost its own form of cruelty in a certain way. The sort of the reduction of not only the pain he caused his wife, but also the pain he's causing to the other person
Yes.
involved.
Yes.
Right? He's sort of reducing the humanity of this other person as
Yeah.
well. And from your approach, do you find that sort of an internal or external interpretation of a word like meaningless, do you think
Yeah.
that sort of informs and changes what the betrayal actually is?
Right. So what was so fascinating to me about this was I have a good friend who's a psychologist who was very helpful because I have transcripts of psychology of counseling sessions, marriage counseling, which was, I couldn't have done it without her.
Yeah.
And she gave me this book to read, and it was called What Happens After the Affair. I was reading it. It was so fun. I have to just, a quick side note. My husband and I went away, and my daughter was dog sitting, and I'd left this book sitting in my office. And she texts me, and she goes, a photo of it. What is going on? I was like, oh, it's research. It's research. We're all good. Anyway, but what was so interesting to me was that a man thinks that saying an affair is meaningless makes it less hurtful, and a woman thinks it's more hurtful. Right? So he's trying to dismiss it like, oh, it meant nothing. I love you. And she's like, and yet you could hurt me so carelessly. If you actually fell for somebody, I would feel better because, there
would be thought behind it.
There would be thought behind it and emotion behind it. But yeah, it was just so interesting the way men and women look at affairs differently.
100%. I've without creating some kind of sob story narrative of myself, but my marriage broke up because of infidelity on her part, which I didn't even actually know about until after the divorce, and it was a whole thing. But so I've read many of those, state of affairs and all those kinds of and I do find it very fascinating how how do I put it, the sort of social stigma of an affair behaves very differently from the actual internal logic of an affair.
Right.
I find, and what I appreciated about the way you framed it in your book was that, I mean, I don't know how spoilery we should get with the interview or not,
Right.
because in a certain way, there wasn't an affair. There was a different thing.
Right. It was
and so it behaves,
a greater level of
Mhm.
betrayal, I
Mhm.
think. Yeah. And I think, sorry if I can
Of course.
address, like you would understand so much the outside, everyone having an opinion on what you should do, and
Yes.
them thinking, if you're going to rebuild, we need to get out of here. We don't want everybody telling us, you should leave, you should stay, you should be angry, you should forgive. Everybody's got their opinions.
Yes.
I'm
Yeah,
sure
yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so for them, if they're going to rebuild, they're like, let's just quiet the noise and start over, just the two of us.
Yeah. But circling back to that idea of connecting but being isolated is the way I've found that people need to sort of connect with each other is sort of counterintuitive to the way we are often taught how to.
Right.
Was any of that going into your thought, or was it just that it's a really great setting of they're isolated, in terms of, I find often if you want to learn more about yourself, you connect to others. And if you want to learn more about others, you connect to yourself. And so that you can be open to the other experiences.
That's a really good point. And no, I didn't think of that.
Yeah, fair, okay.
It's a great point that I did not think of.
Super,
no, it
yeah.
just felt like very much the getting away from the judgment. And, I have been lucky enough to be married for 30 plus years to a great guy and love him to bits. But would I be able to live alone with him on a hillside in Spain where I don't speak language? No. I would go insane.
Yeah. Even if it was the healthiest.
I just think, oh my God, because I was like, why would you let these strangers in, right? Unless you're extremely isolated and, desperate. She says right when they knock at the door, she's like, she wants conversation. She's lonely. She's lonely within her marriage. So,
and isn't that such a perfect encapsulation of I find one of the biggest reasons for breakdowns of whether it's marriage or any relationship at all is when you put so much into the one person. And you expect the one to hold up, and it's like we're not a creature that thrives on just one-on-one.
Exactly.
We're a community,
you need
right?
more than that. And they've both, Sydney and Bianca, have both recently lost their mothers, and there's levels of connection between the strangers.
Big time. One of the things the book explores, it's not just around the sort of the physical infidelity, but also the idea of the sort of slow erosion of trust that then picks up steam. It's kind of the avalanche effect in a way, In your experience while writing, not just these relationships, but in writing relationships, how do you find people underestimate what will actually sort of break and what will kind of continue building pressure? If that, is it in a sense that like, is it the trust itself, or is it something else that finally sort of splits the scene?
Right. Well, if I can talk to just strangers in the villa for a second, because I think it kind of applies. Like, I really wrote to a theme of what is forgivable. That was in my head from the get-go. So sometimes a theme comes halfway through a book. You kind of figure out the theme, but I feel like theme is important.
Big time.
And, I wrote it down, what is forgivable? And that is the theme for all these relationships. And, we start with an affair. Can we forgive this? Yeah, we can try. We can work on it.
But then it escalates.
And then there's more, and there's more, and there's, things that are happening in that house and between these two couples. And there's like payback and evening the score and things like that come into it that just make it all very, very messy. And then there is something that truly is unforgivable.
Yeah.
That would be the ultimate deal breaker.
Because that is something, by the end of the book, one of the biggest internal questions I was asking myself as I was engaging with the characters and what was going on was the question of what actually is justice.
Right.
Because there's a sort of a systemic justice, and then there's sort of a personal, and then there's sort of a true, is justice even possible?
Yeah.
The ending delivers a type of satisfaction.
Yeah.
But then when you actually think about it and you start kind of pulling the threads and you think about what's actually still there and what's still out there and what's still going on, you realize a violence or a harm or whatever
Yeah.
whatever word you want to use about it, it doesn't exist in a vacuum,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
and then how you decide who gets what from there.
Yes.
So
Yes.
so I guess I'm asking a few different things at once, but I'll tease it apart so we can get
Right.
through it. I think we have to be spoilery about this. I think
Okay,
we really do.
okay.
I don't think we could dance around it too
Okay.
much, because I also think that these are really, really important topics. I think what you explore in the back half of the book, I think, is really vital in today's
Right.
current conversation around,
Yeah. Very
there is a president
Yeah.
who is directly involved in
I know.
these kinds of behaviors,
Yeah.
So, as you look at things like sex trafficking and as you look at things like, exploitation and assault of underage girls and how they try to couch that language, how they try to soften it,
Yes.
and when when it's very much not a soft thing.
Yes.
You said something about, what is forgivable. And,
Yeah.
and I guess, so maybe let's set the baseline here of what do you believe justice for something like these acts can be? And is justice a achievable end?
I know. So, if, so Sydney, our main character, is a public defender. So justice is like ingrained in her. Like she's helping people who don't have representation, who may be marginalized, and that's really important to her. It's not in it for the money, she's in it for the right reasons. And then she finds out that her partner did truly the worst thing imaginable. And what was so interesting, since we're doing spoilers, as I was writing Curtis and his justification, I was thinking of Prince Andrew.
Yes.
Right? I think
That's who I read.
You can convince yourself, you can forgive yourself for things you're doing, and you can make excuses for what you did, and you can pretend it wasn't as bad as it was. Right? And that's what he's done.
There's that thing of we judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their actions.
Right.
And that's how I read him.
Okay. Exactly. So he has created this, he's justified it to himself. And his wife's like, absolutely not. Absolutely unacceptable excuse. And I'm going to take out the worst punishment. But again, there's layers. And I mean, it is alluded at the end that she will try to get to the bottom of the greater problem. But as we know, that's not easy to do.
And when it came to the resolution, it wasn't that I had a problem with it so much as it was one of those, but the problem's so much further than this one guy. And so it almost felt like he took a punishment in a way for not his crimes, in a certain way, right? Obviously he had,
get a role.
There's no exoneration of him. It's just that it's like the deeper problem is beyond him. Right. And so it became punitive in a way that I didn't think was unnecessary so much as I was like, there's more, there's worse, there's right. And so I guess that's sort of the next stage of this question is sort of like, how far back do you have to go to figure out who the real victim is and who the, real victim's even the wrong way of putting it. Right. But it, how do you maintain that sort of trajectory of I keep on coming back to the word justice, but it doesn't feel like the right word for it. Like restitution or retribution or, I think that's where for me was that it was a switch from, it almost became like vigilantism, right?
It did,
right?
It did. But again, when writing that theme and writing, these four characters, I mean, it's such an isolated world. They're out of context. They're far away from where they are from. And they basically say like when, I had an affair, so we leave the scene of the crime. They use the term scene of the crime, right? So they're removed. I wasn't taking on big systemic issues that could be dealt with. I mean, we see what's happening in the world right now, and it's impossible to deal with them in real life. And I wanted there at least to be some justice, like someone to pay. Like it feels like no one's paying for anything these days, right? And in what we're talking about here, and so at least somebody really got their comeuppance in a book.
No, and I like, and that actually really, that it's funny that actually connects to something that I was talking about in a previous interview with Susan Nielsen, who was on the who was on the show, was sitting right where you are,
awesome.
a couple months ago, and we were talking about the idea of how so much of fiction especially these days, when we deal with things like, speculative fiction or future narratives, it's always, and everything went wrong and we've all fell apart
Right.
and we all made mistakes. And so we're sort of using fiction to model the worst case scenarios.
Right.
And we're forgetting that fiction can also model the best case scenarios
Right.
as well. In a lot of ways, we use fiction to sort of dress rehearse reality.
Yeah.
You know?
And especially I have to say crime fiction. Like
Yes.
I think sometimes people think it's like dark and wrong
Mhm.
to be inspired by something you saw on the news or some true crime that, something about it is like, I want to know more. I want there
Mhm.
to be justice. I want there to be closure. And we can
Mhm.
do that in a book. We can
Exactly.
take a crime and fictionalize it
Yeah.
and figure out the whys and what drove, I mean, it's not real, but it gives us answers and it makes sense of behaviors and we can have some sort of justice in a book.
Exactly. And it's not real life. That's the point.
Yeah,
Right? Right?
exactly. Yeah.
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 And I think that that's one of the things that always makes me laugh when people got kind of hung up on this stuff of like,
Yes.
well, it's not this or that. And it's
I
like, yeah,
know.
because it's not,
Yeah,
right? That's
exactly.
the point of it.
Exactly.
But it does then give you touch points of if something similar were to happen, you don't just have the one reference of when they made the wrong mistake
Yeah.
or when it resolved wrong. It's like, oh, or it could go this way as well.
Yes.
And I think that that's what I appreciated about this, was that it gives a very definitive end to at least one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some justice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There definitely is.
This show in general very often looks at questions around loneliness, connection, and we've already kind of been scratching at it when we talk about these characters. But, we talked about Sydney directly invites the strangers in and she says outright how lonely she is,
Yeah.
And even within her marriage, how lonely she is. And I was wondering if you can kind of elaborate a little bit. I think we've talked a little bit about this, but if you could elaborate a little bit more on what exactly does it mean to be lonely within a relationship?
Oh God, I think it's the worst, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
like it's much better to be on your own. Like I said, I'm very lucky to be in a happy marriage, but I have been in relationships that were
Yeah.
bad where I was like, I would way rather be alone, but then you're still sort of society wants you to make it work and you don't want to disappoint and you're needy and you want the companionship and you want what you think it means and so I think it's not an uncommon thing, unfortunately. And also I do think that especially in a city like Vancouver where it's so expensive, I think people stay sometimes in relationships for financial reasons too.
Yeah. Yeah. Right at the cold open, I was talking about this idea of the continued risks of opening up to people and how we've talked about the idea of we're a communal animal and we want to open up and we want to connect, but we also know the risks that
Right.
come with that. And, case in point, Sydney's instinct is to immediately open up to the Australians to help them and to kind of protect them in a way, right? But that is ultimately what opens her up to the danger. Now, do you find that scenarios like this in fiction do you think that they teach us to trust strangers more or less?
Not.
Yeah. And and I'm not trying to drive at like, fiction is the problem or something,
Right,
but speaking of things like modeling and speaking of things like, creating
Right.
scenarios, do you think that it has a impact in one way or another or in a certain direction?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Honestly,
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think people are so, from what I'm seeing comments online, people are
Yeah.
so firm on their like, I would never let anyone, in
Yes.
my house. Like I don't know. I'm the kind of person that like has one glass of wine and tells you my entire life story and then goes, what did I do? Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed at the neighborhood
There's a reason I'm
Christmas party
sober,
or whatever. or 0 glasses of wine. I still do it. And then I'm like, oh, like I'm just very open.
Yeah.
And, I'm sure I regret it at times,
yeah.
but I have an isolated job. I'm an isolated
Yes.
person. And so connection is really important to me when I can get it. And I
yeah.
don't really get it from being reserved.
I often suspect that people think they'll do something in a scenario more than they actually would when faced with the scenario.
Right.
Right. You know, it's the idea of the people who say like,
Yeah.
oh, if I was there, that shooter would never,
Yeah.
whatever, you know, and it's like,
True.
it's the
But you
good guy
don't
with a gun
know.
fallacy, right? You know, you have no idea.
Exactly.
You know, unless you've been in a room where someone is firing a gun in anger, you
Yes.
don't know what you'll do unless
So
you've
true,
trained, right? You know?
Mm.
And so sometimes I think that's part of the sort of exploration. And the question is like, you know, people think, oh, if someone came to my door, I would, but
Or
then
you
you're
hope,
there.
or
Exactly.
you hope you would behave in a really noble way and
Yeah.
and stand up and fight the bad guy, but would you? I don't know.
Very
Yeah.
likely no.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
Yeah. Now, I've got one or two questions around sort of representations of polyamory, and
Okay.
I want to couch it though, because I want to make sure that this is not me trying to, I'm not trying to gotcha. I'm not trying to, you know,
Okay,
come at
okay.
you around it. I'm genuinely curious about it. I'm in a polyamorous practicing relationship. And so, you know, while the book itself doesn't sort of explicitly go into it, you know, the couple that arrives are,
More
they seem
open.
to be, yeah, right, exactly. But there is sort of something around the setup that I found really interesting around, you know, there's the isolated monogamous couple, and then there's the sort of connected outsider, you know, who then ends up sort of toying with them a little bit,
Right.
you know? And I'm wondering, do you find, and this could be either in sort of literature or in real life, you know,
Yeah.
whichever direction you want to go with that. Do you find that monogamous connections build an inherent kind of pressure cooker, or that the sort of that structure can potentially provide a sort of a certain kind of built-in failure?
Yeah.
And was that a part of the sort of
Well,
exploration there?
It certainly works for the plot, right? I mean, there
Exactly.
would
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
there would be
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
story
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
were like, fine, okay, I'm totally open to
Yes.
you being with somebody else,
Yeah.
right? It was this, again, these trust and issues and these parameters that are placed on monogamous relationships.
Mhm.
So they do set themselves up. They're great for crime fiction, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
They're great for people being wronged and you know, and I think even in the open relationship, there
Mhm.
are deal breakers
course.
that happen in this plot
Yeah.
and lines that are crossed.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it's kind of like there's problems in both situations.
Well, and that's what I really appreciated about the portrayal, because I found in conversations I've had throughout the years, you know, the misunderstanding that it's like being polyamorous means free for all, and it's like,
Right.
no, there's
No,
there's still structure.
rules.
There's still
structure
yeah,
and rules.
yeah, yeah. Funny enough, that my follow-up question to that is, you know, the thriller genre literally will use a trope like, you know, open relationships or things like that as a way to add danger or add a problem or a wrinkle to the pressure, you know. But often it won't explore whether the structure of monogamy might be what's generating the crisis,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
Do you think that that is a choice that, you know, you as a writer can talk about around the sort of what form it implicitly takes
Right.
about different relationship strength?
Well, I am in a monogamous relationship.
Mhm.
Never been in a polyamorous relationship, so I can only
It's
write to
exhausting.
my to my limited experience. You know, I wrote a book called The Swap that is actually about a couple swap, and all the problems are created by the monogamous
Sure. Yeah.
You know, the okay, well, we all agree that we will have this one night, two couples are friends, and we all agree it's all fine, and then it's just not fine.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you know, it's really, really bad, and
Yeah.
it takes a really dark turn. And exploring it in this novel, Strangers in the Villa, it also just felt like this is just the world we live in now, right? I feel
Yes.
like it is very, you know, I've got kids in their 20s, and a lot of their friends are very open, and you know, I know that that is much more common than when I grew up and got married and stuff. So it just felt, you know, and I also wanted to play with these age differences.
Yeah.
I really liked having like a couple who's 40, I think they're 40 or early 40s, and then a couple who's in their late 20s. They're very different.
Yeah.
And I know what it's like to feel old.
Yes.
Like old, and I'm not cool anymore.
Yep.
And you know, I
Yep.
used to be cool.
The world's passed me by
Yes,
somehow, and I don't know
exactly.
when
So
or
they
where.
feel
Yeah.
they feel like, oh my God, like, you know, like look at these cool young people think we're great, and you get like really flattered by that, enamored with that feeling.
In one of the reviews I read, it talks about that how the language barrier that's involved really intensifies that isolation, but it also doesn't overshadow the sort of characters' interior lives, you know.
Right.
And I'm wondering, how did you how did you use the physical isolation of the villa to sort of externalize what was happening with where they were at the different stages within the sort of narrative progress?
Yeah, I think that, there are some little trips, there's some day trips that they go to explore, and even then they're always isolated, right? Because they're
Yeah.
not part of the scene, they don't speak the language, and
They go to the local beach, but
they
they
go
still
to
don't. Yeah.
and they still don't connect with
Yeah.
people, and there's still just the four of them in this little microcosm, and we even have a scene where Sydney feels so envious of
Yeah.
the Spaniards, because
Yeah.
I've been that girl. Well, I remember when I was in Spain,
Yeah.
like, look how much fun they're all having.
Yeah.
I don't,
Yeah.
I don't do that. I don't
Yeah.
go and sit and have
Yeah.
3 gin and tonics on a Friday night with my neighbors. Like,
Yeah.
it's just different here, right? So they're always isolated. And the other thing that's great about the setting is that it is Catalan, so Catalonia. So they don't speak regular Spanish,
Right.
right? So you could even go, I've actually had friends who went there going, well, I speak Spanish. And they're like, well, they
Tough.
don't.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
don't speak
Yeah.
Spanish, and they're offended if you do, right? Like, right?
Hey.
Like there's a whole
Hey.
separatist
Yeah.
movement there. And so it's a politically complicated place as well, and really hard to kind of crack in and feel like you belong. So it just kind of works with
Adds a
their
whole another layer. That's
and
fantastic.
it just felt when I was there, it was like there's so many, and Salvador Dali is from there, and
Yes.
he
Yeah.
had a very famously open and
Hmm.
complicated marriage, and she was his muse. We got to go to his house and his
Hmm.
gardens, and it's just so crazy and cool and
Hmm.
awesome. And I mean, that was so many years ago, and
Right. Yeah.
they were so groundbreaking. So just everything about that area, I was like, I got to write a book here.
I'm curious about, you write these thrillers and these, and you put these characters in these dangerous situations, but now I'm hearing it's like, it's inspired by like trips you took,
Yeah.
Do you find yourself, out in the world and being like, sort of creating scenarios where you go, or do you find you just like enjoy yourself, and then upon reflection you think about like, well, what if it had gone a different way? Or
Yeah, no, it'll happen like on the trip. I
mm,
definitely was thinking of it, about where I could take. I had a bit of a different plot in
mm,
mind at the time, but I did know I wanted a couple who had escaped for some reason, escaped from probably an infidelity or a problem, and so I was kind of thinking about it then, but that was like 3 years ago.
right, okay,
And then I didn't write the book until maybe 2 years ago now,
sure, okay,
year and a half ago. I remember I did a panel during COVID with
mm,
Lisa Jewell, who is like the queen of thrillers. Like, she's
okay,
my idol. And she said, when you are the writer, you never feel afraid because you have all the control,
yeah,
right? So
yes,
I can be in Spain plotting a murder mystery in Spain
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
feel completely fine,
yeah, yeah,
because I'm the one that's
yeah.
killing people off. I'm the one
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
making the
You're the
making the
danger,
choices.
yeah,
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 I'm the danger. So yeah, I never scare myself.
yeah. There's something, a little bit of a follow-up around the setting and the isolation. There's something sort of gothic around these kinds of scenarios of people trapped in the house, and especially when they're trapped together. It's almost like you've got echoes of things like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. You've got
Right.
echoes of The Shining in a way.
Yeah, Rebecca.
Right? Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Great.
Yeah.
But what is it, do you find, about these kinds of like confined spaces that strip away social performance, and then that we often sort of normally rely on with each other, but
Right.
what is it that triggers that? Is it because you're like, oh, there's not as many people around, I don't have to worry about my mask, or what do you think that is?
It's like a reality show.
Right? Yeah,
They're in
yeah,
the mansion and they're all drunk,
yeah,
right? Like, it's
yeah.
like and I haven't really done that in a novel before, having
Mm,
such an isolated location.
mm,
And I actually had been a little bit worried about just having 4 characters,
right.
right?
Yeah.
And I was like, usually there's a bigger cast and more ways to complicate things, but with the backstory and all the secrets that everybody has in their past, and then the interaction between them and the layers of things going on there,
Mm,
it did feel like plenty.
yeah, yeah.
So it was so fun to, isolate them like this, but then to, have little threads of what their
Mm,
lives were like before and
mm,
who they really are
mm.
when they're in their natural environment of America in this case.
Have you yourself been in scenarios where it's been like, it suddenly gets distilled down into sort of the locked room scenario, and suddenly somebody just is a totally different person than you were thinking? Has that ever happened in real life? Like, I'm not saying it doesn't happen,
Yeah.
obviously, but I'm just curious if you had personal experience.
I have actually,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah.
more comedic than scary.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
went on my friend's 40th birthday. So I grew up in Quesnel, BC,
Mm,
and my friend from high school had his 40th birthday, and he lives in New York now, and he's this fabulous, wealthy real estate agent who's done so well. And he, for his 40th, he invited a bunch of his like hometown girlfriends,
okay.
and then all his like rich, fabulous, gay friends from New
Yeah,
York,
yeah.
and then some from LA. And we all stayed in this very remote house in Buzios in Brazil.
Oh my
And
God.
there were two little cars, and we couldn't walk anywhere,
Mhm.
and we didn't all fit in the cars. And it was an absolute gong show.
I'll bet.
And everybody was fighting, and people were moving out. And I mean, it was just like, it was so. Then we went on a boat ride, and the boat got like swept to sea in a storm, and we had to be rescued. Like, I mean, it was like, I still think
Comedy of errors,
sometimes
yeah,
I would
yeah.
like to write a script or something about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, being so isolated with these people that you didn't really know,
Mhm.
everyone was great. It was just little clashes of personality or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was.
It's because it's not always like, oh, the mask comes off and now you're in danger,
Yeah.
right? It's just,
Yeah.
oh, that was what you were doing because you thought that's what society demanded of you, and now that that's removed,
Right.
you can do something else, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Funny that you mentioned Quesnel. I worked in Barkerville for a few years, so
You-
Quesnel was the big city to me for those
Oh,
summers. It was like,
Wow.
oh,
Were you in the
know.
play or something?
My first summer, I was a tour guide on the street, and then my second summer, I was one of the blacksmiths.
Oh,
I actually made the
God.
charcoal every day to fire to
God.
make the forge run.
I
Yeah.
feel so fondly about Barkerville now. But as a child, we had one field trip, and it was to Barkerville
yeah,
every year. And the bus ride was so long.
Yeah,
And you always got
yeah.
car sick.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, Barkerville again.
Yeah.
And now I'm dying to go back to
Yeah.
Barkerville.
It's I mean, I haven't been in this 15 years ago now, but it was
Yeah, Gold Rush,
yeah,
Gold Rush
yeah.
Town.
Strange. That's a place I want to set a book up there. You don't get, I'm saving that
Okay,
one, right?
that's yours. Okay. Hands off Barkerville. One year I had this really creative teacher. I always think what an amazing creative education I had coming from a small town like Quesnel that is a pulp mill town. And I had this teacher who let us set plays in Barkerville.
Mhm.
We had video cameras.
Like you just
We
stage
got
them
to
there.
go in. We
Oh,
got to go in.
amazing.
They opened
Yeah.
up the,
like the Royal or whatever it is, the Theatre Royal.
They
or
let,
the...
but no, in the little houses.
Oh,
They'd open them
oh.
up and let us in so that we could put on our plays, and we'd like have to creatively film around, like pretend we're coming out of the well with our gold nuggets. And I wrote one about all the women. The men were all away, and the women discovered all the gold. And yeah, it was so fun.
It's an incredible place up there.
Yeah,
It's such a
it's great.
strange little pocket in the world. This is a little kind of just a curiosity around craft and things like that, because you're often writing around families, you're writing around marriages, parties going wrong, these kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
But there is this consistent thread of the thing you're most afraid of is already inside, kind
Right.
of. It's sort of already you already let it in, whether
Yeah.
you think even here. Sydney thinks she's letting the danger in with the couple, but it's been there a while,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Is that a kind of a conscious preoccupation or a kind of reoccurring thing for you? Or is it just something that keeps finding you in your writing?
I think it must keep finding me, because now I've written 8 thrillers, and I'm really trying not to repeat myself. I'm never out of ideas. I'm very lucky. I'm never out of premises anyway. And then I think it's perhaps when I create the characters, and I love the psychology of people, and I love the psychology of why people do the things they do, especially people who do either morally gray or morally terrible things. I'm like, why would you do that? And I love to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes maybe it's that emerging is that, we're taking people through a plot, but it's who they are is what's really making that happen. Making the problems happen.
And actually it leads into the way you employ multiple points of view. It really strengthens not only just the natural narrative, but you see the different justifications, right? How do you? Well, I mean, the first part of that is how do you portray characters who are externally untrustworthy, but who are validating themselves, and justifying themselves. How do you find yourself writing that? Is that, I mean, I guess that's just called writing human thought, but,
Yeah.
but like, do you consciously do
It's
that,
interesting because I took a break from writing novels a few years ago and I was writing screenplays.
Mm.
And you don't have that access, right? You're
Mm.
not inside somebody's
Yeah.
heads. You have to show everything through action and through dialogue and be very subtle about it. And it was such a great learning experience and such a skill to add to the repertoire of a novelist, right? Because you're showing they're
Right.
behaving in a certain way that is without having to necessarily spell out everything. But then when I went back to writing novels, I'm like, God, it's so great to be able to just be like, here's what I'm thinking, and this is why I'm doing it.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's such a gift.
Yeah.
It's such a gift to be able to just
Yeah.
spell it out,
Yeah. But then what's so fascinating too is that then, they're saying why, and yet it's like, I'm especially thinking of Curtis, who,
Yes.
he literally thinks he did something else. He's
Yes.
so in his head
Yeah.
that he thinks he's convinced himself
Yeah.
otherwise.
And I don't know if I've ever written someone quite as deluded as Curtis,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
he has really
Yeah.
convinced himself that he is not a bad guy. And he is really, and I think that is quite common
Big time.
in people who do really commit terrible crimes.
Yeah.
I think people can talk themselves into believing lies, their own lies. I think they can also forgive themselves and justify things and start to believe the narrative. I think that
Yeah.
that is a human ability to trick yourself.
Especially when you
And-
added, drugs and all that. You can say,
Yeah.
oh, well, I was whatever,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah, so you have a lot of excuses. So
When you're laying that out for a reader, do you find yourself, like, how do you stay honest to the character that you're writing while also not wanting to kind of show your hands, you show your hand to the reader too soon?
yeah, it's
How
all
do you find
about
that?
it's all about laying down the breadcrumbs.
Mhm.
And I do a lot of rereading as I go, a lot of editing as I go. I'm not a messy first draft kind of person.
Oh,
I
okay.
am
Yeah.
go back and I go back and I go back
Mm.
until I'm so bored with it I can't. I've lost all
Yeah,
perspective,
sure.
right? But yeah, it's just sort of I feel like it's just sort of an inherent feeling. Having written 14 novels now, I feel like it's sort of just in me
Yeah.
to figure out where things need to be said,
Gotcha.
And then I have beta readers and, writer friends who help me with that kind of thing. And my husband actually is really helpful, even though he's not a creative person at all. But
Sometimes those are the best, though.
yeah,
That's the-
exactly.
yeah.
He's like the continuity guy, like
yeah.
he's the person you're watching a movie and he goes, oh, look, the glass of wine was 3/4 full and now it's totally full, right? And I'm like, oh my God, who cares? But he notices those things when he reads, right?
Yep,
And they do matter in a novel.
Just a little kind of closing out, to very, very loosely try to tie it back to the themes of the show. What I'm often exploring in interviews is this question of, genuine connection, and how do we go about building that, and where do we go about building that? Is it only possible in real life? Is it possible online? But ultimately, I think that's what all four of these people are looking for is a genuine connection of some kind, even if they go about it in
Right.
the worst ways
the worst
possible
ways,
sometimes.
yeah.
If you had to distill what the book is actually scratching underneath all of those kind of thriller mechanics, what do you think it's actually asking about sort of human nature and what we're looking for?
Yeah. I think that it is that desire for connection is so strong that removing yourself for some people is just never going to work.
Yeah.
Whatever
Yeah.
your reasons. Just to go off on a tangent,
yeah.
I watched this show called Neighbors last night.
Yeah.
Have you heard of it?
I
It's
haven't,
on
no.
HBO. It's made by A24.
Okay.
And it's these people who have moved to Montana to be all alone.
Well, they've already made a mistake.
They don't want to be
Yeah.
around anybody, and they're having this huge feud with their neighbors. It's a documentary. And it
God.
just was so interesting to me,
Um,
and tying to this whole theme of isolation, that you're like, I don't want to be around anybody, but the person who lives 8 kilometers away, I'm going to have a feud with them, right? Like, it's just so interesting and bizarre, and how you have to connect some way,
Yeah,
whether
yeah.
good or bad, right?
Do you think that there's something inherent in us? I kind of hate this question, but it's just popped into my brain. Do you think there's something inherent in us to like find connection any way possible, like you say, like even if that connection is conflict, like is that a personal thing or is that a societal thing?
I tell you, when you watch this show,
Yeah.
you will say yes. It's also set in America, and a lot of it is set in Florida. The
Right.
fights between people and you're right, like the negative connection to some
Yeah.
people maybe feels, and I do think I've listened to, like, I wrote a book about trolling, online trolling, called The Haters. And when I researched that, people like that. People enjoy that. Like, they feel like it gives them purpose and connection by harassing somebody.
Yeah.
They actually like it. So, people,
Yeah.
who knows what makes them feel like they're connected these days.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Robyn, thank you so much for taking your time to chat with me. I really
Thanks
appreciate
for having
this.
me.
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
really nice to
The,
talk. And I loved how you tied in the theme of this
Yeah.
book to the theme of your podcast, because
Yeah.
I did not see the connection originally.
I mean,
Until you started talking, I'm like, oh yeah.
I mean, at first I was just in it for a good read, and then I was like, oh wait, no, there's
Yeah,
more here, right?
fits, it
Yeah.
fits.
Well, thank you so much for
Yes,
for
thank you.
joining
That's
us.
so
Really
nice.
appreciate that. The book itself, Strangers in the Villa. I will make sure there are links in the show notes for any listeners. Is there anywhere else you'd like listeners to find you? Anything you
I
wanna plug?
am on social media, Instagram, R Harding Writer,
Okay.
Facebook, Robyn Harding, Robyn with a Y, and I have a website, robynharding.com.
Fantastic. And all that will be in the show notes as well.
Oh, great.
But one last time, just thank you so much.
Thank
and
you.
I don't have a proper sign off, so I always end up just sort of trailing off
Okay.
at the end. Right?
Thank you, James. It was lovely to talk to you.